Alright, another 2 lures for the lure display board. Welcome back to the Engineered Angler. Today we're going to make a big popper. The kind of big popper plug that you see being used in places where you can fish for really aggressive species on topwater, mostly saltwater. And unlike my usual builds, I'm not going to make it with screw-in eyes or a drop-in harness. I'm going to make it with a through-wire harness. But I'm not going to make a real typical one. In fact, one of you guys messaged me on Instagram and shared with me a short video of someone who had made a popper that was able to pivot both on the belly and on both the tie-on eye and the tail hook eye. I think everybody would agree that that's kind of different from what we mostly see. And I was asked whether I knew how this was done. And my answer is absolutely maybe. I'm not sure. I came up with a way. It's not the most elegant solution to this, but I think it'll work. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So here's the general shape of a big saltwater popper, and that's the typical arrangement for the eyes. When you have a through wire arrangement, typically you're going to have your wire running from the tail hook eye to the tie-on eye all the way unbroken. Traditionally, the tie-on eye is just folded back and laid up against the wire, and the tail hook eye will have a washer usually, and then it will get wrapped back on itself. And this section is usually held in place with a sleeve or a grommet. The belly eye is usually connected with a swivel. That allows for that belly hook to spin when it's hooked up. What we want to do is have this whole shaft be able to spin freely, so that means we can't use these kind of twists in the back. So we're going to have to do something a little different, and I'll show you what it's going to be as we go along. First, we need to shape this thing on the lathe. We're going to get started with this cypress log. Still got most of its bark on there. Now I usually will draw shape exact and give you the dimensions before I start shaping it, but this time I want to go ahead and just do this by eye. I want to decide the shape and the length and everything just as I go along. Alright, let's make it about as long as my tool guide, which should be around 7 inches. Alright, that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and sand this down smooth because it's pretty rough. Alright, that feels pretty smooth. I like the shape. It's a little big, I gotta say. This thing's a beast. I think I'm going to have to take a trip to Australia or something with this thing.
This is a good opportunity to get the hole drilled through the body, at least part of the way.
That should do it. Alright, first I'm going to cut the angle on this popper face. So I'm pretty happy with that cut. The angle is nice and subtle. All I got to do is take this little remnant off, and I'll start to bore out the hollow with this little rasping bit. Alright, I'm going to use this die grinder and grind out the popper face. Alright, that's pretty smooth. All I need to do is just really give it a nice sanding along the edge. Alright, so I got lucky and I was able to go all the way through. Now Now I still have to drill this hole a little bigger in diameter, and I still have to drill the belly hole. But before we do all that, we need to talk a little bit about some hardware. So let's go back in the shop. Alright, so typically on a lure like this, there's a lot of hardware, not just the wire. There's always some grommet hardware, some sleeves that go in the holes where all these hook hangers are. There's a sleeve at each one of these holes to protect the wood. Usually at the very back, there's a dome washer. Now, I don't have any of these fancy lure making hardwares, so I'm gonna make something, and instead of having the windings on the outside of the lure, I wanna have them on the inside. This way the lure will be really clean looking, and this will be free to spin. All this is going to be a little bit of a challenge without having the formal hardware, but what I plan to use is going to be these little rivet cases. And I've got some steel tube that I plan to use for the hole at the belly. Alright, I still haven't actually told you how I'm going to get this thing to spin on all three of these eyes and have all the wire twists on the inside of the body. There's a few ways to get this done. You could fabricate a three-way swivel at the belly hook. The other thing I thought of doing is that the same way this is just a swivel on a pin, you could put swivels on pins all the way around and just have pins going through the body. But then at that point, it's no longer a through wire arrangement, right? In that little video, you'll notice when he spins one end, the other end spins too. So I know that that's a continuous wire or some kind of continuous structural member, right? So I think I'm on the right track, and this is what I'm going to do. I've left a little bit of a flat spot, and so I'm going to cut the lure, taking out a section just a little longer than the length of my twist eye. This way, when I remove it, and imagine that's that section with the hole in it, and then what I'll do is I'll cut a slot all the way across, so that when I insert my wire assembly, I can just drop this thing in and glue it in place. So that's the idea. It's not the most elegant solution, I agree, but it'll work, and it maintains the strength of the lure because all the stress is still carried by that one length of wire. Now, speaking of strength, in that same video, that person hangs like 100 kilograms of lead on the wire going through the lure. It doesn't take a genius to know that's not the weak point. The weak point is the swivel in the belly, or whatever connection you have in that belly, because that's going to have some sort of discontinuity and there's going to be a lot of load there. But the problem is these guys, they are notoriously weak. I wanted to test this, and so I went ahead and took it out to the shop and I went ahead and pulled it and broke it. So you can see those swivels, even though they're big, they're not as strong as you would think they would be. Although I think with the kind of fishing you do with a popper, you're going to depend a little more on the rod and the drag than the hardware in the lure when it comes to that. The white lines are the cut lines, and then the red marks are there for later alignment, so I can put it back together pretty much the way it came apart. Yep, that's going to work. And now comes the part that I don't like about through wire plugs, and that is that you've got to seal all these holes that you've drilled because water is going to get into the middle of your lure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this spar varnish, it's a marine varnish, and I'm going to dip these things all the way in there and make sure they get soaked, and then I'll leave them drying overnight. It's the next day and these guys are pretty much dry, and they seem to be pretty well sealed. Now, I've already shown you this little piece of sleeve that I'm going to use for the belly eye, because that's going to be a swivel that's going to ride in there. And all I did was to take this stainless steel tube and just cut a little tiny section off of it. But we need to prepare a couple of rivets so we can use them for the two ends. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and use these 1/4 inch by 1/2 inch rivets. The sleeve is the perfect size. You just sort of grab it in the hollow of a pair of pliers and just hit down on the pin so it comes out. Here you go. Now I just need to do one more. I also have to bore out this hole so the wire twists will fit in there. Alright, so we've got them bored out. Now I just need to shape them a little bit. I want this to be a little bit convex, or a little bit kind of rounded, so that when I put it on the tail, it'll kind of contour to the shape a little bit. And then the other one, I'm going to make concave a little bit so it fits inside the popper mouth real good. And to do that, I'm going to use a little section of steel tube, put it in my vise. And then to make this one cupped, I'm going to just sit it up there upside down and just give it a couple of taps. And hopefully you can see that it's kind of bulged out a little bit. And then to do the other one the other way, I'll just set it in there, stem down, and I'm going to use the back of this little ball peen hammer to help shape it. Now it's a little bit convex and it should fit inside that popper mouth. All right, let's go ahead and test fit it on the tail end. And I think that's going to be pretty good. All right, so while we're working on hardware, this is what the eye twist is going to look like. And you can see it'll fit right in the rivet and spin pretty freely. All right, I've gone ahead and tapped in the grommet in the middle, and I fit the end piece and masked it off. And I've got the piece in the cup too. So the next step is to go ahead and make the through wire. All right, first thing is to form the eye. I'm just using some jeweler's pliers, and everything I have here that I bought, I've tried to find a good link to put on my Amazon store. So if you're interested in buying it, if you buy from there, it's the same price, but I get a little piece of the action.
This wire bending tool I designed and made myself, and I made a video on how I did it. I'll put a link in the description.
And 4 wraps is really all you need on this. I'll cut off the little tag, and we'll double check to make sure it still fits. All right, with that first twist I done, try to get all the marks aligned, and I'm gonna mark right where the wire comes out of the back, and that's where I'm gonna start my bend. So I'll take the spacer out, and I also have to get the swivel in there. And there we go. And I'll start that bend right on my mark. And that's 4, that's plenty. All right, and that should just slide right in. Let's see how the spacer fits. It fits right in there, cool. Wow, we lost power. I'll be back in a minute. Hopefully we'll get our power back. All right, power's back. Man, I live out in the country, so even on a sunny day, we might lose power. I've got it just fitted together, and these guys spin nicely. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna mix some 2-part epoxy and just glue this spacer in there, and I'll spare you those details. There's nothing to that. I'll fill that slot with some UV resin, and I'll get back to you when I'm just doing some final sanding before we put an initial clear coat on it.
I almost forgot we need sockets for the eyes. And I want to add some weight just to make sure that the body wants to sit straight up when it's in the water.
All right, let me bring you up to speed. I masked off all the hardware, and then I gave it a couple of coats of white primer.
I gave it a light sanding, and then I mounted it on my holder and gave it a really good thick coat of UV resin. Stuck it in the chamber to let it set.
And we're ready to paint. I'm just gonna give this a little scuffing with some light sandpaper so the paint will stick. All right, I've got it set up for painting. I'm not really sure what kind of paint job I'm gonna put on it, but I want it to be bright, bold, maybe even shiny. I don't know. I'm gonna start off, use the last of my Wicked aluminum. So I wanna start off with a base coat of shiny metallic paint. the way the bottom came out with the graduated yellows into the orange and red, and I think those gold eyes are gonna work just fine. So the paint job is kind of growing on me. I really like the way the darks transition into the lighter colors. I'm gonna go ahead and give this thing a couple of coats of polyacrylic just to seal the paint, and then I'll put a clear coat on it. All right, this thing was in the UV light overnight. So I wasn't too excited about this paint job, but it's kind of growing on me. I think it looks pretty nice. Let me go ahead and take all the tape off, and then I'll give you a closer look. I think that homemade hardware came out pretty good. And of course, the goal we were shooting for. And these colors really won't come into their own until it's in the sun. So let's go ahead and take it down to the dock. I'll give you some better shots in the sunlight, and then we'll see what it looks like in the water. All right, first, let's get a quick thumbnail for this thing. All right, let's take a look and see what it looks like just floating in the water. Alright guys, I had to get out of that sun. I just want to say thanks to everybody who's watching, everybody who's commenting and being involved in the general community, and thanks to the person who offered me that video and that little bit of a challenge. I think it came out pretty nice. The only thing I would say is that the popper mouth is just a little too small, and it's just part of the learning curve. Alright, so I'll see you all for the next video next Friday.